If you'll take your Bibles with me, and we'll continue our study in the prophecy and eschatology from the book of Daniel. Daniel chapter number 7 will be on tonight. Daniel chapter 7. Let's recap while we're turning there. Let's remember some of the things that we've gone over so far. In our first week on prophecy, we talked about and eschatology, not all prophecy. We're not going through all prophecy. We're going through eschatology specifically. And in our first week on eschatology, we talked about the three main Christian views on eschatology and the 5 things that need to be accomplished in the future, or some people would say they've already happened. That is the return of Christ, the reign of Christ, the new heavens, the new earth, the resurrection, and these things, and of course the tribulation, the 70th week of Daniel, the 7 years that we like to refer to as the tribulation. And so a premillennial view will say that all of this is in the future. The next thing to happen is the 7-year tribulation. The return of Christ happens before the millennium, right? He comes back after 7 years of tribulation, the 70th week of Daniel. And then he reigns on the earth for 1,000 years. And then after 1,000 years, he creates a new heaven and a new earth and continues reigning on and going on reigning forever. So that's the order of the premillennial view. And the premillennial will also say that the resurrection happens in conjunction with Christ coming, but also, some people will say that the rapture takes place as well before the tribulation, and those are both part of Christ's coming. That's not agreed on by all pre-tribulation, premillennial views, but pre-tribulation is the view that we hold. Now, so there's the premillennial, then you have the postmillennial view. The postmillennial view says that actually what happened is that the 7-year tribulation, or the 70th week of Daniel, they wouldn't call it the tribulation, but the 70th week of Daniel, that 7-year period, actually is already finished. It finished in the first century, and they'll usually say it started with Christ's baptism. The midway point was Christ's death and resurrection. The end was when the gospel went to the Gentiles, when Peter preached to the Gentiles, to Cornelius. And then they'll say that all the other things that need to happen all took place in the first century, and that Jesus is currently reigning on the earth through us, and that the kingdom is already here on the earth, and it's just getting better and better and better until the whole earth is Christian, and we can turn the kingdom over to Christ, and he'll return and then set up a new heaven, new earth. And so they say postmillennial that Jesus actually returns to the earth after the millennial reign, and they say it's not an actual 1,000 years, it's just a long period of time of him reigning through us, and then he returns and sets up a new heavens, new earth. Then you have amillennial that says that the millennium is sort of figurative, there's no actual millennium on the earth, and Christ reigning on the earth, he's reigning in heaven, and that of course after this period, there's going to be sort of like a tribulation. Some say it's just a day or two. Some say it's 3.5 years. Some say it's whole 7 years. But then Jesus returns and new heavens, new earth. So you have premillennial, Jesus comes back before he reigns. Postmillennial, Jesus comes back after he reigns through us. And amillennial, there's no real millennium on the earth. There's no real reigning on the earth. Jesus will just come back and he'll make a new heaven and a new earth. So these are the 3 positions. Then we talked about how these positions deal with prophecies like Daniel. Daniel chapter 2, which gives us the foundation, the starting point for prophecies, really for all of these views of prophecy. How does that fit? How does that work into a time frame, a basic timeline that's given to us in Daniel chapter 2. Daniel chapter 2 is the vision of Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar sees a statue made out of the head of gold, and the head of gold represented Nebuchadnezzar and his kingdom. It was all the different parts of the statue were different kingdoms, and so the head was made out of gold. The chest and arms were made out of silver. The center section was made out of brass. The legs were made out of iron. And then the feet were made out of iron and clay. And so you had 5 kingdoms represented here. 4 or 5. The first one, the Babylonian Empire. The next one was supposed to be an empire that would conquer Babylon, which we know was the Medes and the Persians, or the Persian Empire, it became known. And then the next part would be a kingdom that conquered the Medes and Persians, which would have been the Greek Empire, the brass. And then the final part was the legs of iron. And you saw that these all increased in strength, but decreased in value. Gold, silver, brass, iron. And it shows that each kingdom was sort of less glorious, but was stronger and lasted longer as they went. The Babylonian Empire was the most glorious of the kingdoms, but it didn't last as long as the Medes and Persian Empire, which was, less glorious than the Babylonian, but lasted longer, but didn't last as long as the Greek Empire, which didn't last as long as the Roman Empire, and so on and so forth. But then, in this dream, we saw that the stone that was cut without hands, which is certainly Christ, a picture of Christ, comes and smites the image on its feet, and its feet have 10 toes. And it says, in the time of these kings, which I am going to suggest, and I suggested before, refers to 10 kings of this final kingdom, these 10 toes. In the time of these kings, Christ will return and set up his kingdom on the earth. Now, this kingdom, being made out of iron and clay, is extremely weak, and so it would make sense that it is extremely short-lived, and it comes as some sort of attachment to the legs, which are made out of iron, which are the Roman Empire. So we've got these empires that we've seen in history already came and went, right? The Babylonian, the Persian, the Greek, and the Roman empires. They're all predicted by Daniel. And then finally, the feet are the one thing that haven't really happened yet. There's never been 10 kings over the Roman Empire. Chapter 2 says that the kingdom will be divided. Those things haven't happened yet. And so these things, a premillennial will say, see, that's the tribulation, it's in the future, and that's what Jesus comes back. And that's when Jesus comes back and establishes his kingdom at the feet, right? A postmillennial is going to look at that image and say, well, they're part of Rome, and Christ started his kingdom with the church when he back during the Roman Empire. But the problem is the Roman Empire continued a long time after the church was established, and it never had 10 kings, and it wasn't divided. The Roman Empire wasn't divided till long after the establishment of the church, hundreds and hundreds of years later. So it doesn't really work so well with a postmillennial when you start looking at the details. Works really well with a premillennial. Let's talk now about Daniel 7. And the reason I went back and recapped all of this is because these are things that are actually going to be extremely important. This is a foundational vision that Daniel, every vision of Daniel, every prophecy of Daniel really builds on itself. So this first one is foundational and gives you that baseline for the next one. And the next one we find in Daniel chapter 7. And Daniel 7 is after the time of Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar, in chapter 2, he has the vision of the image. Daniel says, you are the head of gold. You're Babylon. You're the head of gold in this image. Chapter 3, Nebuchadnezzar goes and makes a big image of himself made out of gold and says, everyone, you got to bow down to it. The God of heaven said, I'm the head of gold, right? And the 3 Jewish boys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, decide they're not going to bow down. They get thrown into the fiery furnace. God rescues them out of it. And Nebuchadnezzar still doesn't get the message because and then in chapter 4, he's still lifted up with pride against God, and he actually becomes like a beast of the field. He goes absolutely crazy. His hair grows long, and the Bible likens his hair, the length of his hair, to eagle's feathers, and his nails like talons, and he's like a wild beast. He's actually gone crazy. It's kind of like what we have in the White House right now. He's leading the nation, but he's gone crazy. And eventually he humbles himself, he realizes what he's become, and he turns to God, and God gives him a new heart, and he turns back to the Lord. And now I say that because it's important for this next vision. This vision in chapter 7 is given after the time of Nebuchadnezzar, but still during the Babylonian Empire. There's a new guy in charge of the Babylonian Empire. His name is Belshazzar. Verse 7 says, "In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head upon his bed. Then he wrote the dream and told the sum of the matters. Daniel spake and said, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of the heaven strove upon the great sea. And four great beasts came up from the sea, diverse one from another. The first was like a lion, and had eagle's wings. I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth, and made stand upon the feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it. And behold, another beast, a second like unto a bear, it raised itself up on one side, and had 3 ribs in the mouth of it, between the teeth of it. And they said thus unto it, Arise, devour much flesh. After this I beheld, and lo, another like a leopard, which had upon the back of it 4 wings of a fowl. The beast had also 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrible and strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with the feet of it, and it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. So maybe you're recognizing already that there's some similarity here. There's 4 beasts, just like there were 4 different kinds of metal, the gold, the silver, the brass, and the iron. And the 4th beast, has teeth of iron. You see some similarities here. You might already be guessing, even if you haven't read ahead and finished the chapter, that these are talking about the same kingdoms that were in the vision in chapter 2 with the image. And you would be right. We're going to show why that's the case in just a moment. Let's continue reading. He's still on the 4th beast, and it says that there were very, very important here at the end of verse 7, it had 10 horns. Now remember, the end of the legs were the feet of iron and clay in the first vision, and it had 10 toes. Of course, 10 toes. But it mentions the toes, and it says, in the time of these kings, which I'm already theorized are the 10 toes. But I've told you we haven't proved that yet. I think we can prove it with chapter 7. Or at least give really good evidence for it, okay? Verse 8, so that it had 10 horns. Verse 8, I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of man, and a mouth speaking great things. And I beheld till the thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days did sit, whose garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head like the pure wool. His throne was like the fiery flame, and his wheels as burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from him before him, and thousands ministered unto him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The judgment was set, and the books were open. I beheld them because of the voice of the great words of which the horn spake. I beheld even till the beast was slain, and his body destroyed and given to the burning flame. As concerning the rest of the beasts, they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. I saw in the night vision, and behold, one like the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven, and came to the Ancient of Days, and they brought him near before him, and there was given unto him dominion and glory, and a kingdom that all people, nations, languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom that which shall not be destroyed. I think we all understand that the Ancient of Days, this final kingdom that destroys the kingdom with that 4th beast, is the Christ, right? That is the Messiah, that is Jesus. Now, here's where a postmillennial is going to say, aha, see, that 4th beast is a picture of the same as the legs. It's the Roman Empire, and Jesus sets up his kingdom during the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire is gone, so that means his kingdom must already be here. Okay? But that makes sense as an argument up front, right? But let's look a little deeper. Let's look at what the details are, because if you just take generalities, you can try to find fulfillments all over the place. But if you look at the details, you'll be able to find out if these are fair arguments. Okay, so let's start by doing this. This is the neat thing, because as I said last week, the cool thing about Daniel's prophecies is they're all, not only do you get the prophecies, but you get the interpretation of the prophecies too. So Daniel here is now, he's had this vision, and he's like, what in the world's going on? So he asks, what's the interpretation? And he's given the interpretation of these things. That's really cool. You look at Revelation, and there's just all this prophecy, and you don't have the interpretation of it. But if you look back at things, similar prophecies in Daniel, and you see the interpretations given, then we can then take that and say, okay, this is how we should understand Revelation, right? And this is how the Bible is interpreted. This is especially prophecy. We must go based on the precedent that other similar prophecies are interpreted with. So this is really interesting. So verse 15, I, Daniel, was grieved in my spirit in the midst of my body, and the visions of my head troubled me. I came near unto them that stood by, and asked him the truth of all this. So he told me and made me know the interpretation of the things. The great beasts which are 4 kings, which shall arise out of the earth. But the saints of the Most High shall take the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. Okay, so all of these kingdoms, all of these beasts are 4 kings. So we have now a confirmation that these are matching up with the kingdoms of the statue in chapter 2. All right, let's look at the first one. Right, the first one we said the statue in chapter 2 was Babylon. That would mean that the lion here in this beast, the lion with the wings of an eagle, are referring to Babylon, and that makes a lot of sense. Look at what the lion does in this passage. The first, verse 4, was like a lion that had eagle's wings. I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth and made stand upon the feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it. Now, think about this. Remember what happened to Nebuchadnezzar. He became like a beast, and then he was restored. He was set back up, given the man's heart again, when he humbled himself. So this is a beautiful picture of Nebuchadnezzar. But not only that, the book of Jeremiah even speaks about the Babylonian Empire. Excuse me, I can't get my words out. The Babylonian Empire, and refers to it as a lion in more than one place. And the Babylonian Empire, one of the big symbols of Babylon was the lion. On the streets of Babylon, you actually found lions engraved. There are lions engraved on the walls of Babylon, on the palace. Everywhere you looked in Babylon, there were lions engraved everywhere. It was the big thing about Babylon. It was sort of like the mascot, if you will, of Babylon. These lions. And so it's just very abundantly clear that this lion with the wings that, is restored up like a man is talking about Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonian Empire. Okay? And it also fits with the head of gold. So this is easy. This is an easy interpretation, not hard at all. Then we look at the next one. Well, what kingdom conquered Babylon? It would have been the Medes and Persians. It's interesting here that this kingdom is represented like a bear. It raises itself up on one side. Now it's interesting, the Medes and Persians were called the Medes and Persians early on because it was an empire that was controlled by the king of Media, the Medes. And the Persians were sort of allied with them. But what happened when Cyrus the Great took over, and he's the one who conquered Babylon, is he also conquered Media. He actually, even though they were alliance and they were together, they ran the empire together, he being a king of Persia actually invaded and conquered the Medes. And so it went like the Medes up here and the Persians subservient to them, and it just completely swapped around when Cyrus was the king of the Persians, and he conquered the Medes. And then later on, the Persians would refer to the Medes sort of as second-class citizens. It's almost like racism, right, between their own little thing. So it became known as the Persian Empire because really, even though it was the Medes and the Persians ran the show, right, after Cyrus. And so this is why you see them represented here as a bear that's lifted up on one side. And it says that out of the bear's mouth are 3 ribs. Now, this is probably referring to the 3 kingdoms that the Persian Empire took over in order to establish their empire, one of them being Babylon. But that's probably what that reference is. But it says that they devoured much flesh. And it's interesting that the Persian Empire really was very much like a bear. They just kind of went through and destroyed everything they could that wasn't sort of indiscriminate, you know. And this is a very great description of the Persian Empire here with the bear. And the Persian Empire, this bear is, after the bear comes up, and by the way, all of these are coming out of the sea, which is kind of interesting. The sea, meaning, which is a picture throughout the Bible of, you know, sort of the world, the nations of the world. And out of the nations of the world come up this lion, which is the Babylonian Empire. And out of the nations of the world come up this bear, which is the Medes and Persians. And then it says another beast, the third one, verse 6, I beheld, and lo, another like a leopard, which had upon the back of it 4 wings of a fowl. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. Now, this refers to another kingdom. Now, the leopard, according to the interpretation Daniel's given, is another kingdom, and it has 4 heads and 4 wings. Now, the leopard is the fastest of all animals, and it makes a lot of sense that this is used for the next kingdom, the empire that conquered the Persian Empire. That would be the Greek Empire. You see, the Persians conquered and conquered and conquered, and they tried to conquer Greece. And that's where it all fell apart for them. They could not conquer Greece, but got Greece pretty riled up and angry at them. And from Macedonia came this guy named Alexander the Great. And he came through and took over and attacked and took over the Persian Empire really fast. Within 12 years, he had conquered the Persian Empire. For a point of reference, Nebuchadnezzar had actually besieged the city of Tyre for 13 years and couldn't actually ever, take the city of Tyre completely. But Alexander the Great not only came through, took Tyre, but he took the entire Persian Empire in 12 years. That is really fast. I mean, really fast. He comes quickly. And so you have, after Babylon, you have the Medes and Persians and then the Greek Empire that are predicted here by Daniel before they ever even existed. It's interesting that in the next chapter, we're not going to take, just for sake of time, we're not going to go there, but in the next chapter, we actually see a more detailed description. Maybe we'll get into this a little bit next week. But we see a more detailed description of these 2 empires, the Medes and Persians and the Greeks. And it actually says what the empires are. The first, it says that there's a ram with 1 horn that was raised up above the other. And it says that these are the kings of Media and Persia. All right? So the Medes and the Persian Empire. Daniel actually even comes out and names it, and this time, instead of a bear raised up on one side, it's a ram with 1 horn larger than the other. And out of the west, which is where Greece is from Persia, in chapter 8, comes a goat with 1 notable horn. That's Alexander the Great. And it says that this notable horn, it's later on in chapter 8, it says the notable horn is a great king. And he comes swiftly across the land without touching the ground. He comes that fast across the land and kills the ram. And this is exactly what Alexander the Great did. He came quickly, very fast, and destroyed the Persian Empire in 12 years. But then Alexander the Great actually died rather young. Most people think it was malaria. He was sick with something. And he left his kingdom to 4 kings. Actually, when they asked him, who do you leave your kingdom to? He says, to the strong. He wasn't a very nice guy. He's kind of a mean guy. He didn't really care. And he said, to the strong. And so this didn't really leave them a very good situation, a very stable situation. And what happened is his generals sort of just fought over the land. And it ended up being divided into 4 different pieces. The 2 that are most notable is down in Egypt, which would have been the Ptolemy, or I say Ptolemy, it's PT, but it's actually Ptolemy, the Ptolemaic Empire. And then the Seleucid Empire, which would have been former Babylon and Persia and the Holy Land at some time. They was fighting back and forth over Palestine. But the interesting thing is that it got split into 4 parts. Now remember, in chapter 7, we have a leopard, signifies speed, that comes after the bear, and he has 4 heads and 4 wings. And then in chapter 8, we haven't read it, but I'm just giving you what happens in chapter 8. This ram that signifies the Medes and Persians, the goat comes that signifies Greece, kills the ram, and that one horn that signifies Alexander the Great is broken after it kills the ram, and 4 horns comes up in its place. You see how Daniel is giving prophecy that so specifically tells us exactly what's going to happen, and it hadn't happened yet. Daniel wasn't alive when Greece came around. Daniel was barely, only lived for a short time into the Persian Empire. This is amazing. This is just absolutely fascinating what he's able to predict long before it happens. And this is clear testimony that God is in charge here. So what's interesting, though, is that there is in here a proof, right? All these other things happening exactly the way they are is proving that the last thing is going to happen. And this is the one where we get into end times prophecy and what we call eschatology, end time stuff. So look at this. After those other 3, the Babylon, Persian, Greek Empire, now you have that 4th one that's the same as the iron legs. And look at what it says that there's 10 horns. And remember in chapter 8, the horns represent kings. There's the 2 kings of Medes and Persia, but one is lifted up above the other. The 1 king of Greece is broken, the Alexander the Great, and 4 horns come up in his place, 4 kings. Horns represent kings. It says that there's 10 horns on this last beast. Now, Daniel is interested to find out what this means. So he says this after verse 18. It says, verse 17, these great beasts which are 4 kings which shall rise out of the earth. He's getting the answer from an angel that's standing by. But the saints of the Most High shall take the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever, even forever and ever. So there's a summary of what the vision means. It means there's going to be 4 kingdoms, but eventually Christ comes back and the saints take the kingdom, and it all goes to the saints. Okay? Verse 19, he wants a little bit more interpretation. Then I would know the truth of the 4th beast, which was diverse from all others, exceeding dreadful, whose teeth were of iron, and his nails of brass, which devoured, brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with his feet. And of the 10 horns that were in his head, and of the other which came up, before whom 3 fell, even of that horn that had eyes, and his mouth that spake very great things, whose look was more stout than his fellows. So he says, look, what is this beast that had the 10 horns? I'm really interested, what does the 10 horns mean? And why were 3 of them taken out when 1 came up? And that one really bothers me. He was speaking these terrible, concerning things, speaking against God. And he said he beheld, and the same horn, verse 21, made war against the saints and prevailed against them. He says, I'm glad that the saints win in the end, but this really bothers me, that this one horn is coming up and it's making war with the saints and prevailing against them and speaking things against God. It says, until the Ancient of Days, verse 22, came, and judgment was given to the saints of the Most High, and the time came that the saints possessed the kingdom. 23, thus he said, the 4th beast shall be the 4th kingdom upon the earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms. So here's our interpretation. The 4th beast is that 4th kingdom. It's diverse from all the other kingdoms, and it shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down and break it in pieces. And the 10 horns of this kingdom are 10 kings. Here we go. The 10 horns are 10 kings. This is why it's a really good guess that the 10 toes on the statue represent 10 kings. Okay? 10 horns are 10 kings that shall arise, and another shall arise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first, and shall subdue 3 kings. So this tells us that all 10 of these kings have to be here at one time, because when the other horn comes up, the other king, he's actually going to take out 3 kings to make place for him. He's going to have him assassinated, or he's going to have him taken out, or put in prison. Somehow he's able to conquer 3 of those kings and take their place, which means that all 10 of these kings are all at one time. Now this provides a problem for the post-tribulation view, a post-millennial view, because the post-millennials want to say that all of this took place in the first century, and that's when Jesus set up his kingdom with the church. But the problem is, never has the Roman Empire ever had 10 kings at a time, much less were 3 of them, 10 kings there, and 3 of them were taken down to allow for another one to take their place. So this, while yes, the Roman Empire was in place, and yes, Christ ascended into heaven, and in a sense he's in charge of all things, right? He's reigning in a sense. He's not reigning in the way he's supposed to reign on the earth yet. And we know this because none of this has happened. We don't have 10 kings anywhere. So we have then what's going to happen in the future, this idea that if the Roman Empire still has a period of time left, the time of the feet of Daniel 2, that's going to be really weak, it's going to be really short-lived, but there's going to be 10 kings, and 3 of them are going to be taken down to allow one new one, and this one's going to persecute the saints. This is the one that we would refer to as the Antichrist. John referred to it as the Antichrist in the book of 1 John. To this one guy who comes and persecutes the saints in a special way, speaks against God, all of this stuff. So this hasn't happened yet. There's a lot of people who've come and persecuted the saints and spoken against God, but they haven't fulfilled this specific prophecy where there's 10 kings, they take down 3 of them. That hasn't happened yet. And so this is why we know then that not only are the feet made of iron and clay in that chapter 2, but that iron does signify some connection with the Roman Empire, because this whole beast represents the Roman Empire that comes after the Greek Empire, but it's not finished yet. It's interesting that the Roman Empire is actually the only one of these 4 empires that was never conquered. You know, it was the Roman Empire, then it became the Roman Republic, and then about 300s of the 4th century, it sort of allowed Christianity and sort of adopted Christianity into the empire, became the state religion, and then over time it sort of flopped. Christianity became, in charge of the government, and eventually the empire just dropped out. The Romans called it the Holy Roman Empire. Now it's run by the Pope. It's the Catholic Church who's running the empire, and eventually the empire just sort of dissolved and went away, but it was never conquered, and the actual Rome and Italy is still there. It's still controlled by the Vatican's still controlled by the Catholic Church, and Italy's still run by a government, and even though it's not an empire anymore, it's still there. It was never conquered. And it's very conceivable that this could be something, that this could be revived, that they could again gain control of the world, whether it's through the UN or even through the Catholic Church, right? There are definitely ways that we could see this happening, but either way, somehow connected to that old Roman Empire, there's going to come up 10 kings. 3 of them are going to be taken down to let room for the one to come up, and that's going to be the Antichrist. So these are just the things we know, right? Now here's what the Antichrist is going to do. He's going to persecute the saints. Watch this. And he shall, verse 25, he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High. So he's just going to constantly, after the saints, he's going to speak against God, and think to change times and laws, and they shall be given into his hand until a time and times in the dividing of a time. Now, what it means by he's going to try to change times and laws, we really just don't know. But it'll be something that I think those who are here when it happens are going to say, he's changing times and we're getting this now. But I think he's talking about unifying the world under trying to unify the world under a one world government. I don't know if it'll work, because we're told there's going to be lots of wars during this time as well. We'll get into that when we get to Revelation. But I think that's probably what it means when it says he's going to change times and laws. But it says, here's important, that they shall be given into his hand until a time and times and the dividing of a time. A time, that's one. Times, that's at least two, right? And the dividing of a time, that's a half. So 1 plus 2 plus a half is 3 and a half. Could be 3.5 months, but it makes a whole lot of sense for this to be 3.5 years. We're going to find out later when we get next week when we get to Daniel chapter 9 that there is a 7-year period that's left for this man to try to do his damage, and it would make and halfway through that period he's gonna, there's going to be an abomination of desolation. And, as we tie these things together, you'll see that it seems to be at the halfway point of this 7 years when the Antichrist starts saying, I'm going after the saints. I'm persecuting them with all that I have. And this makes a lot of sense that here it's said that that the saints are going to be given to his hands for a time, times, and half a time, 3.5 years. Now, this did not happen between the death of Christ and the gospel going out to the Gentiles by Peter, that 3.5 years. It did not happen between the baptism of Christ and the death of Christ, those 3.5 years. It didn't happen in the time of Nero. None of these things have happened already. This is something that hasn't happened yet. So what we see here, that he's going to be given 3.5 years to really just go after the saints and try to kill them, try to persecute them. It says, verse 26, but the judgment shall sit, and they shall take away his dominion to consume and to destroy it unto the end. And the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High, whose kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve him and obey him. So these things troubled Daniel. It says that it troubled him much, and his countenance changed, but he kept the matter in his heart. So that's what we're going to get. So let's recap what we've gotten from these two prophecies in Daniel. Daniel uses the prediction of the three kingdoms, Babylon, Medes and Persians, and the Greeks, that he's predicted now between chapter 2, chapter 7, and chapter 8. He's predicted 3 times, the Medes and the Persians and the Greeks, and 2 times the Babylonian Empire, and then after the Greek Empire, the Roman Empire. Okay, so several times now he's predicted over and over that it's going to be Babylon, it's going to be the Medes and Persians, it's going to be the Greek Empire, and then it's going to be the Roman Empire. And this Roman Empire, this fourth empire, is going to be diverse from all the others, which it has been, there's no question about it. And eventually, at some point, the Roman Empire looks like the feet in chapter 2. It's going to be very weak. It's going to have iron mixed with clay. And it's going to have 10 kings, like the 10 toes, 10 horns. And 3 of those kings are going to be conquered by one guy who's going to take their place. He's going to persecute the saints for 3.5 years. And he is going to be destroyed by the coming of Christ. Christ is going to return and destroy this guy. And destroy this empire. Now, if you think about the post-millennial view, you don't have the 10 kings. You don't have the one guy who destroyed the other 3 kings. And you also don't have Jesus returning to destroy this guy. They'll say, oh, he returned in a way in 70 AD, but he destroyed Jerusalem, not this guy, right? Oh, in a way, he returned, he set up his kingdom when he rose from the dead. Yeah, but no, he didn't. But even if he did, even if you're going to argue that was supposed to be when that kingdom was destroyed, when the Roman Empire continued for a long time after that, and it was supposed to be divided before all that. None of the details really work on the post-tribulation view, post-millennial view, excuse me. But the premillennial view is going to make a lot of sense with Daniel, right? Because we say, yep, we saw the first kingdom, Babylon, we saw the Medes and Persians, we saw the Greeks, we saw Rome, but there's still the last part of the Roman Empire, the feet, that we haven't seen the fulfillment of that. And somehow the Roman Empire is going to sort of be reassembled. Whether it's still called the Roman Empire or not, it's going to be in some way connected with the old Roman Empire. It's going to be weak. There's going to be 10 different kings that sort of head it up, and one king's going to kind of conquer 3 of them and take over. So people say, well, we're getting close. Well, yeah, but there's some things that we don't see yet on the world stage. We don't see the Roman Empire revived. Although this could all happen after, assuming, and we'll get into the rapture at a later date, but assuming that the rapture takes place before the tribulation, it could be very, very well that it's after the rapture that this all comes together. So we don't have to see it before Christ comes back necessarily. But it could be that the UN is a really good launching point for all of this. The World Health Organization, we've seen that sort of has control over the world. The Catholic Church has a long reach. Some people have suggested that maybe it's through the Catholic Church that this is all organized. I wouldn't want to take any kind of leap in judgment and try to say this is how it happens. This is how it's fulfilled. We don't know. All we know so far are the basic facts. There's something connected to the Roman Empire that's in the future. It's going to have 10 kings. One guy's going to conquer 3 of those kings, and then he's going to go out and persecute the saints for 3.5 years. And he's the one who's destroyed when Jesus returns and sets up his kingdom. That's what we know. And we can tell from the first century and from history, this hasn't happened yet. Things like it have happened, but nothing that fits all the details. So we can say, I think with confidence, this is something in the future. Now, how all this is put together, just hang on. We're going to get to Revelation, and all of this stuff is going to start. Oh wow, this is happening. This is the same thing that Daniel talked about. This is the same. Yes, these are all the pieces are fitting together. Here's the pieces we've got so far. There's part of the Roman Empire left. 10 kings are involved. One guy gonna rise up above them by conquering 3 of them. He's gonna persecute the saints for 3.5 years. Let's leave it there. And next time we're gonna talk about Daniel 9. We're going to also talk about a little bit more about Daniel chapter 8. And we're going to really going to emphasize the abomination of desolation. We won't get to everything about the abomination of desolation next week, but we're going to start that conversation. Okay? Next week, Daniel 9 and the abomination of desolation, and we'll start adding to this what we know. But thanks for coming tonight. Let's pray. Father, I thank you so much for the truth and the confidence that we can have in the prophecies of Scripture. We've seen all of these kingdoms come to pass. They've all come to existence exactly as you said. There's one little piece left. And we know that we have confidence this is going to happen as well. And we know this because of all the truth and all the other proof that we see in the rest of the prophecy. The Medes and the Persians and the Greeks and the Babylonian Empire, exactly as you said. And the Romans came too. And we know that this last part is still coming, and we can have confidence in it because of all the other proof that we can see in prophecy. We thank you that you have spoken, that we can trust the words that you've said, and that we know that when you speak the truth, and it will come to pass. And so, Lord, help us to keep our eyes on Christ. We know that in all of this, we are looking for the return of Christ. When all of these things happen, that we can keep our eyes on you, because that is where the hope is found. Not in this world. This world is going to get worse and worse. But our hope is in you, and we thank you for it. Help us now as we go. Give us confidence in you. And Lord, we pray that you would come quickly, even before we have the chance to go into any further in this prophecy series. Thank you so much for all of these things. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.